Greetings. In this lesson, we will discuss using a joint chain to rig a small solar system. Let's get started. We'll begin with a sphere. We'll make that, let's say 0.2, and we'll move it out here just a fair distance. We'll create a second sphere, and we can leave that at 1. And then we'll make a third, and we can crank this up nice and large. So here's our sun, here's our planet, and here's our moon. And when we are rigging, it's really helpful to label. And we'll say mesh as a distinguisher in order to distinguish it from the moon joint, from the planet joint, and the sun joint. Okay, and we can assign materials. Right-clicking, assign new material. We'll make it a Fong, and we'll make a little white moon. We'll right-click, assign new material. We'll choose a Fong, and we'll make our planet blue. And we'll choose our sun, assign new material. We'll make it a Fong, and we'll make that yellow. Get rid of my grid. And now we're ready to create the joints. In order to position the joints properly, we're going to turn on handles, and this is very common. And in the upcoming lessons, we'll really concentrate on how to position handles. But in this case, the handle shows up initially where the pivot point is, and it's in the middle of the sphere, which is exactly where we want it. So we don't have to manipulate that position at all. But we will turn it on, display, transform display, selection handles. And if I click off, it's easier to see. We have these handles here, and they just make it primarily they're for selectability, and I would say secondarily, or maybe co-equal in terms of why you would use a handle, is for snapping. And we can use the V key to snap anything to a handle. In this case, we'll be snapping joints. Now, if I go to snap my joints with the polygons on, it could snap to any one of those vertices. So we will turn our polys off. So we're coming to show polys, and we've got that off, and we just see our 3 handles here. We're going to go to the rigging mode, rigging, and we'll come to skeleton and create joints. And out of good habit, unless the instructions ask you to change something, the lesson by default would be the default joint. So I've opened skeleton create joints dialog box, and I'm hitting reset just to make sure we're using the default position. As we lay out joints, it is a hierarchy. So the first joint you lay out is at the top of the hierarchy, and the last joint you lay out is at the bottom of the hierarchy. So we would want to start with the sun. I'm going to hold down the V key and then left mouse button click. You can see that it's snapping between those 3, and we'll leave it snapped to the sun. We've got a little joint there. I'll hold down the V key and snap to my planet, and you see the 2 joints are connected by what's called a bone, and the hierarchy is visually indicated. This joint is in charge of this joint. This joint is the child of this parent. And we can see that the thick side of the bone is on the parent side. And then I'll click again, V key, and click. And I'll hit return when I'm done. So I V snap, let's just do that again. I came to create joints, holding down the V key, and I'm snapping. V key snap, V key snap. When I'm done, I hit enter or return. And we've got those joints, we've got that hierarchy. I can open this. If I just click the plus, it'll just open 1 down. But if I hold down the Shift key when I hit the plus, it'll open up the entire hierarchy. So we see joint 1, joint 2, joint 3. In terms of language, joint 1 is the parent of joint 2 is the child of joint 1, joint 3 is the child of joint 2, and joint 2 is the parent of joint 3. So there's child-parent relationship. The parent is in charge of the child. And if you affect a parent, all of the subordinate children are also affected. But if we affect a child, it doesn't go up the chain. Later we'll discuss inverse kinematics, where we can make a child control a parent. But the standard, and this would be called forward kinematics, the standard forward hierarchical joint chain is parent-child, parent-child. Now, I don't want to leave these handles on, because anytime I go to select my joint, that handle would be selected. And this is very common, so I'm going to hold on here and just make sure we understand this. If I go to pick this joint and that handle is there, it takes hierarchical selection order. If you look up here at your object, this is listed left to right. You see here handles are first, joints are second. So if I have a handle and a joint in the same position, it's going to select the handle first. We turn those handles on for those 3 spheres, not for selectability, but for snappability. So now that we're done snapping, we want to turn them off. And an easy way to do that would be to, let's hide our joints. Oops, we'll hide our joints. That allows us to draw a bounding box around those handles. We could have done it with the joints on, it would have selected, but just for demonstration's sake, I've hidden my joints so that we can see that I only have my handles selected. And when I say handles selected, right, they represent these geometry here. I'll just hide that so it's easier to see. So I've got that selected, and I'm going to turn them off. Display, transform display, selection handles. So when we're rigging, and we're going to be doing lots of rigging, you'll turn handles on, you'll snap items to those handles, primarily joints, but then when you're done, before you move on to the next step, you have to turn those handles off. Otherwise, it makes selecting your rig difficult or impossible. So we use those handles just temporarily to be able to snap our rig, to snap our joints into place. And I am going to name these, and it's always a good idea when you're rigging to name the items of your rig. So we've got Moonmesh, Planet Mesh, Sun Mesh, and then we've got Sun Joint, Planet Joint, and Moon Joint. Let's turn everything on. This icon here will let us see our joints through surfaces. So when that's off, right, we can't see through the surface. So we'll turn this on, and now we can see our joints. Now our planet is completely unrelated to the joints. I can pick my joint and we can move it, and you see that it's not having any effect on the planet. If I grab that, it's not having any effect. Likewise the moon. So we are going to now parent the mesh, or parent the geometry, to the joints. This can be confusing initially as well. Joints can be parented to joints, and that extends and creates that bone. So you can lay out joints, you can parent them to each other, but when we're rigging, we're parenting the mesh or the geometry, the surface, to the joint. So takeaway, joints can be parented to joints. Ultimately, we're going to parent surfaces to the joints. In this case, we want to, let's go in this order. We'll pick the moon, and I'll just have my select tool. I'm using the command key to skip select, right? And a selection order is paramount here. We pick the child first and the parent second. So I'm picking the moon mesh first. I use the command key to skip select my moon joint, and lowercase p is the shortcut, but I'll do it the long way so that you can see it. We're coming to Edit Parent. Now you see that Moonmesh node has jumped down here, and we can read the child-parent relationship as indentation. So the Moonmesh is the very terminal child in this hierarchy, in this chain, this hierarchical chain. If I pick Moon Joint 3, this is what's going to control it. We'll get in there nice and tight, and you can see that we can rotate that, right? So I'm not rotating the surface. I don't have the surface selected. I just have the joint selected. I don't have the mesh selected. I have the joint selected. And when we rig with our joint rig, once we've either parented or bound it, we've created some type of deformer relationship between the mesh and the joint, you're no longer selecting the mesh. You're no longer manipulating the mesh directly. You're manipulating the joint, and that's what we'll be setting keys on. Let's parent this. So we pick the child first. Our meshes are our child, our children. I'll use the Command key to select Planet Joint 2, and we'll come to Edit Parent, and we can test that. So now when I rotate, I've got Planet Joint selected. When I rotate that, right, you see that the Moon Joint is also following downstream or down chain. I undid, and then we'll come and finally pick our Sun Mesh and Shift Select, right? If I'm out here, I could hit Shift Select. If I'm doing it here, I'll hit Command Select. But in this case, because they're next to each other, I could have used Shift Select, right? Command key to skip select, Shift key will select everything in between. So I pick the mesh first, the child, Shift Select the joint second, the parent, and I was going to hit lowercase p, but we'll do it the long way so you can see. We'll come to Edit Parent. And now our rig here is complete. And this will take some time getting used to reading because it's not an up and down hierarchy, it's an indentation hierarchy. So, right, you could look at Planet Mesh here. It's below Moonmesh, right? But that's not giving us a hierarchy. That's not telling us about the hierarchy. It's the indentation that tells us the moon is subordinate. The moon is beneath the planet because it's indented one. So we read the hierarchy left to right, not up and down. You tend to think of hierarchies as being read up and down, but it's read in terms of the indentations. So our rig works. You could test it, right? We're not going to rotate the moon, but we would be picking the joint. We can see that that's parented correctly. We can see that we can rotate our planet, and we can rotate our sun. You would want to save here, and it's good habit. You always want to save your rigged unanimated. So we might call this Planet Rig Unanimated. Then do a save as and call it Planet Rig Animation 1, right? Because so often you'll begin to animate, make some mistakes, or come up with something that you don't like, and you want to be able to go back to the rig, a clean rig, and start your animation again. So every time you open up that file, Rig Unanimated, immediately do a save as, and you can experiment, and you'll maintain that, that file without animation. The rig is complete. Very standard practice. So you would want to go up and save Planets Rig Unanimated. Then do a save as Planets Animation 1. And we'll animate this one. We're going to animate just two joints. We'll animate the planet joint. I'm going to give myself, let's say, 120 frames. So, we've got 120 here. We'll just make it total 120. And we're going to do the planet rotation on 30. So at frame 1, remember our setting keys: move in time, manipulate the object, set the keyframe. Move in time, manipulate the object, set the keyframe. So move in time to frame 1. manipulate the object. This is our planet joint. We'll get our channel box active here. And we're just going to set it. So we're going to start it in this position. So we'll imagine that we've established this here. And then in our animation, we'll come to key, set key. So planet joint has a key set at frame 1. And I'll come to 30, and we'll just make this 360. And I've realized something in the lecture, or not in the lecture, in the lab video, I'm keying directly. So let's key it the same way that the lab video shows. So I'm going to frame 1. I've got this selected, and we're going to right click and key this directly. So I mentioned there's several ways to set keys. In our first video, we came and we hit set key, and you got a key set for everything. You can be more precise and right click on the attribute and say key selected. And now we've just got the little red on the rotate channel. We'll scrub forward to frame 30, right? So move in time, manipulate the object. In this case, we'll put in 360. And thirdly, we'll key selected. And we can see that that rotates around. Now, we know that we've got default flat tangents, so we're not going to imagine that they're slowing and accelerating, right? We're not making a scientific model here. We're just practicing with joints. So we're going to make this linear. We'll come up to the graph editor, and we can see here, here's rotate Y. And one of the advantages to right-clicking and keying it directly is you don't have all of the other attributes, and they're not all the static channels in the view. So right-clicking there gives you a cleaner graph editor. We'll draw a bounding box around these, right, just to select both those keys, and we'll make it linear. Right, here's our flat tangents, and here's our linear tangents. But we don't want our Earth or our planet accelerating and decelerating. We're going to imagine that we just want it rotating at the same rate throughout. Now, the other thing, whenever there's an animation that's going on and on forever, we can set that here in the graph editor. We don't have to keep setting keys. We can come to View Infinity, and so you can see, right, it's showing us that that just goes on forever. And then we'll come to, curves, post-infinity, cycle with offset. So curves, post-infinity, cycle with offset. And now that just goes on forever. You can see that I zoom out, and it's just going to rotate for as long as my animation goes. So there it is. Linear fashion, it's just going to rotate forever. All right, now let's do our sun. We will, at frame 1, set the key. We'll do it directly here. And then let's say at 120. So our planet rotates 4 times as it goes around the sun. So we'll hit 360 here, right click and key selected. And right now we've got that spinning around. But we don't want flat tangents. Window, Animation Editors, Graph Editor. We'll come and select this. We'll make it linear. And we'll also make it go on forever, cycle with offset. And let's say we just gave ourselves 1,000 frames. We can turn on our wireframe so that we can see that it's rotating. So there is a very simple joint rig, 3-joint rig. We created 3 spheres. We turned on their handles so that we could snap the joints right to their center position. Made sure to turn those handles off before we continued. We parented the geometry, in this case the polygonal meshes, to those joints, and then we animated the joints, and in the graph editor we set it to linear and we set it to infinity. There you go. So give that a shot. Questions in the tech forum.